In Monday's edition of 2020 Daily Trail Markers, 4 Democratic presidential candidates are campaigning in rural South Carolina. Former Vice President Joe Biden, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Amy Klobuchar, and Mayor Bill de Blasio are all attending the biennial Galivants Ferry Stump. The event has been taking place for 143 years in a community of just over 5,000. On Monday, it became the center of attention for these 2020 hopefuls, and that is where we find CBS News 2020 campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell. She covers all things South Carolina. LaCrai, good to see you again. Let's start off with a little bit of background. Give us the history and the importance of this particular event.
Absolutely, Elaine. It's good to be here. So it's interesting. Galivants Ferry was started, like you said, it's in its 143rd year. And it's a big deal because Galivants Ferry is an unincorporated community right outside of Marion County and Horry County in South Carolina. And if you don't know much about it, it's because it's a flyover town. You know, event organizers and the family that's been hosting this for all of these years tells me that it's a place that people go through, not necessarily to. And so it's a big deal to have 4 presidential candidates here because this is a community with not a lot of stoplights. You don't have a lot of schools here, and it's right off the highway. So it's one of those places that can be easily forgotten. But these voters, just like all of the other voters, want to be heard, and they want to hear what these candidates have to say. And so while we talked to voters before the event started, that's all we kept hearing. This is historic. We're so excited to be here. I can't believe we'll have 4 presidential candidates here. And they were ready to hear what their pitches were going to be to them.
So with that as our backdrop, what issues are the candidates going to be focusing on?
So you've already had 3 candidates speak, and Mayor Bill de Blasio is speaking now. He's the last candidate for the night. And they've talked about a lot of the things we've heard them talk about on the campaign trail. One interesting thing, though, is they've definitely catered these messages to South Carolina voters. So you've heard frequent mentions of Senator Fritz Hollings. You've heard people talk about things that would be specific to rural voters. Senator Amy Klobuchar made her pitch and said she would not forget about them when voted. Mayor Pete Buttigieg talked more about bringing the country together. And former Vice President Biden, who's continued to be the front runner in the state in polls, he got up there and talked about his history with President Obama, which is something that voters kept telling us time and time again before the event, that that's something that they think means that he has experience to take on this job. And so it was interesting because this message, while familiar to those of us who follow them on the trail, it definitely had some South Carolina hints to it so that they could really appeal to the voters here this evening.
And LaCrai, you touched on this a moment ago. This is the first time the Stump has hosted presidential candidates. How significant is that?
Oh, it's huge for them, Elaine. It's huge. I mean, as I talked to organizers, as I talked to the people here, some people had never been to Galivants Ferry, and they live right around the area, and this was their first time because presidential hopefuls were going to be here. So, you know, it was one of those things, someone described it to me as a historic experience that they had to be a part of. You know, you had people driving here from the surrounding areas, one person as far as 2 hours, because they said they wanted their chance to see these presidential hopefuls up close and personal.
And you mentioned this as well, but I'll just ask you to elaborate a bit more. How are the candidates there working to connect with voters in that part of South Carolina?
Absolutely. Well, you're seeing them, for starters, ramp up their visits here. So more and more you're seeing these candidates come through on the weekends, and they're not sticking to some of the areas that you traditionally see them in. They're not just going to Columbia, the capital. They're spending some time in the upstate, in Greenville and Spartanburg. They're spending some time in these rural areas, the PD area. And so they're making sure that they want these voters to know that, hey, we know that you're an important state. We haven't forgotten about you. And while they're spending time here, they're making sure to maximize that time by going to some of the places that aren't always visited.
Really interesting to hear about that political event. LaCrai Mitchell for us. LaCrai, always great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.